Om Asatoma Satkamaya Tamasoma Jyotirgamaya Mrityorma Amritam Gamaya Aviravirmagethi Rudrayate Dakshinam Mukham Tena Mam Pahi Nityam. May the Divine lead us from the unreal to the real, from darkness to light, from death to immortality. With the Divine consciousness, fill our hearts and protect us. Our topic today is from doing to being. We briefly touched upon it last Sunday, but it'll be good to look at it with a little bit more depth. Both doing and being play a big role in our lives. When we were born, when we were little babies, as all of us were at one time, we were babies. We didn't do much. At least we didn't feel we were doing much. All that babies tend to do is smile, generally. We don't know what they are thinking, but at least smile we associated that they are finding something funny. And when they're hungry, they cry, and most of the time they're just asleep. They are just being babies. Sorry about that. So at that very early time after we are born, as babies, we don't even have the sense that we are doing anything. We just are. Then, of course, when we grow up and slowly the doing part of our life becomes more prominent. And especially we begin to understand words, some language skills develop. We understand what others are saying. We are able to express our feelings. And then of course, slowly we go to school. Then our teachers and parents keep on saying what we must do. And then, of course, we become doers. At every stage of life, there are things to do. And doing and being are connected. As we are doing things, I'm no longer that little baby who are just smiling and crying and sleeping. I'm now grown up. And of course, at different stages of life, we keep on doing different things, and something keeps on changing within us as well. And of course, as we grow older, I mean, we are teenagers and still further up, there are other things then. We don't depend only on what our parents and teachers tell us to do. Our own ambitions, our own desires, our own things that others expect of us, but also what we want to achieve, bring a lot of things to do in life. But one thing that many of us find it helpful, if we have a lot of things to do, to have a to-do list. So far, I haven't come across any to-be list. And so that's what we will try to think about in the next few minutes. The difference between a to-do list and to-be list. And that's because doing and being are very related to each other. What we do is an expression of who we are. And who we are is shaped by what we do. What happens is, as we grow older, both the doing and the being themselves get divided. Almost like, for one thing, is because we become aware of the world around us. We are seeing other people are seeing us. And so there is one division that does occur is between what others can see and what others cannot see. And one thing is clear, what I do in public when there are people around me is what others can see. when I'm just by myself, then only I know what I'm doing. And similarly, the thoughts that I think, well, my thoughts only I can see. Others don't know what I'm thinking unless I give an expression to my thinking. And so both doing, there is a public part of my doing and there is a private part of my doing. And thinking, of course, is just internal, but being also gets divided, because deep down, if we have enough introspection or even desire to know who we are, we might look deep inside and say, this is who I am. But there is also a certain way I like to be seen by other people. And so oftentimes and again, that involves doing. So we do things in a way so that we appear to be to others the way we would like to be. Someone said that just being who we are is a lot easier than trying to be what we want other people to take us to be. But really, a lot of our effort in life is spent in trying to put forth an ideal persona. And deep down, we may know that I may have some gap between the ideal that I try to project outside and who I am inside. And to some extent, the society in which we live, the world in which we live, seems to prize doing more than being. I mean, one common way of people just say, what do you do? And so one way to look at this is, how do we introduce ourselves to other people? And clearly, there's no point in just saying who I am. For most people, they wouldn't care what's going on inside our heads. And so usually when we introduce ourselves to other people, we might say, I'm this or I'm that, I work here, I do this, and so on. But it's also interesting, if you have never tried it, when you stand before a mirror, as I'm sure many of us do several times a day, look at the person in the mirror and ask that person, who are you? At that time, just you and the mirror, your reflection in the mirror, and see, what would you like to say? What comes naturally to you? That when I see myself, do I see myself as someone doing things or as someone who is someone? Now, let me clarify this. When doing takes precedence in our life, when doing becomes the most important thing in our life, our idea of who we should be is different from when being takes precedent. The other thing about doing is that any kind of an activity needs time. It needs energy. And therefore, we know when we have a lot of things to do, we always have to then budget for our time. That this is this much time I can give for this activity. Also, we have to think about how much exhausting certain activities can be. And when we get tired at the end of the day, a lot of that exhaustion comes up because we have done a lot of things. And it also sets up tensions and conflict and stress. Because clearly, any of us can be only in one place at any given time, do only one thing at any given time. Even when people think they are doing multitasking, in a general way, we could say, I'm multitasking. But if you look at it in a more nuanced way, definitely the yoga psychology points out that at any given instant, we can do only one thing. At any given instant, we can think only one thought. So even when we think that I'm holding a lot of thoughts in my mind, it's not, I'm not engaging with those thoughts at the same time. I'm just kind of boom, boom, just kind of flitting from one thought to another. And because it happens so fast, I seem to think that they are all there at the same time. Even with multitasking, a lot of us, when we are driving, we are listening to music or listening to a podcast or whatever. Again, we think I'm doing two things at the same time. I'm driving and I'm listening. And that could be partly true, but I'm not doing both of those activities with the same level of prominence. And that is clearly when you're driving, the most important thing is driving. And all these sounds can fall, whether it's music or whatever. But if I get too engrossed in that music or too engrossed in that sound, then it's not safe. And so at any given time, there's only one activity I can be doing with full attention. When being becomes important in our life, then we ask a different set of questions. We look at ourselves and ask who we have become, and ask ourselves who we want to be. And I say all this because I hope I'm not getting too abstract about these things, but in spiritual life, when we start our spiritual life, oftentimes it becomes a set of things to be done. When someone says, I'm interested in Vedanta, what should I do? And then it will be interesting to see, suppose a friend of yours comes to you and says, I'm interested in spiritual life. What would we ask that person to do? Again, there would a bunch of answers come to mind. But oftentimes we have seen from our own experience in life that it always seems as if we have a few books, some books to be read, some things to be done. Just pray regularly, meditate, do worship, do some selfless service, a lot of things to do. And sometimes in the beginning, it can be very intimidating. It's like, oh, there's so much to be done. So we know, those of us who have tried to live spiritually, know that all of those things that we have done and are still doing are changing me in some way, are making me a little bit of a different person than what I was a year or 2 or 5 years ago. And that me as being, as the self, that one begins to think a little bit more deeply about that. And self, one thing about the self that we have either instinctively or consciously thought about is that if that self is just limited to this mortal being, just this body and mind and so on, it's an amazing self really, who is this human being that every one of us is. And with the body mind that we have, we can do a lot of things in life. But simultaneously, when we become aware of this just vastness of this universe, even this planet Earth on which we are, tiny as this planet is from the astronomical calculations point of view, for us it's still a big place. We know that all of our strength and power that we have is still very limited compared to the power of nature. There is a big hurricane or an earthquake or a tsunami. We know this is nothing any of us can do. And so usually what we also find is that as long as this self remains small, it can never become free from anxiety and worry, just from its survival point of view. In the ancient days, of course, there was T-Rexes and dinosaurs moving around, so there was physical survival was um, doubtful. Um, to some extent, the dinosaurs have been replaced in our times with fear of terrorism and so on. So there is still, not everyone feels physically safe, and of course, gun violence and all of that. But even more than that, there is this survival of the ego, that when we are surrounded by people, everyone with different ideas, different ways of thinking, and everyone trying to assert themselves, even then people feel unsafe. And one of the ways that feeling of being vulnerable to a larger forces outside us, we then try to overcome by somehow expanding ourselves. And one way of expanding is through the connections that we make, the relationships that we have, the communities that we form. So, me as one person may not be able to handle all the challenges, but if I have a family is a group of people, then I feel as a family we can deal with many challenges that as a single person I may not be able to do. Further, I can expand it further and say, well, as a citizen of a country, then I feel a little bit more secure that in times of difficulty, my country will protect me, my family will protect me. If I have a large circle of friends, they will protect me. So if we can build these connections in some metaphorical way at least, not that myself is expanding, but myself is becoming a part of a larger whole, a part of a family, a part of a community, a part of a country. And to the extent I'm attaching myself to this larger whole, I feel protected. There's something that is surrendered as well. There is this one little book. It can get quite intricate, but if you would, it's an old book. It's called the title "The Courage to Be" by Paul Tillich. He's a great theologian. So in that book, he also deals with this: the self just being by itself, and the self being part of a larger whole. And when the self becomes a part of a larger whole, there is a certain thing of that self is surrendered. And we know that if we want to derive the protection of being a citizen of a larger country, for instance, the country has certain rules and regulations. I can't say I'm free, I can do whatever I want, then I don't get that protection. And so in being a part of a larger whole, we get something, but we also sacrifice that full freedom of the self. Now, this can be extended further, and what a spiritual life would mean, that rather than finding our protection in these larger groups in this material world, which can be very helpful, but if we think a little bit, that they still have their limitations, that they can't protect me against every challenge. So spiritual life really means, can I then attach this little self to a much larger reality, a larger truth, which is all powerful, which will never fail. And that's essentially what discovering our relationship with God means. That if I see myself, that I'm not just this little self, I'm connected with the divine. And that's how many of the schools of philosophy in Vedanta have come. That recognizing the presence of this larger whole, being aware of this smaller little me, and then trying to find out how this little me is connected with this infinite, large, powerful being. And many schools of philosophy have come, but broadly, all of these schools have been divided into three categories. That there are those who see that this larger being is a father figure, a mother figure, and I'm an eternal servant of that being. That, and in return for my obedience, in return for my serving that whole, the being will protect me always. But the master-servant relationship, or any other way I can see it, will always remain. The being will be a benign figure, a protective figure, but still forever separate from me. And the other way one can connect oneself to the divine is to say, it's not just that I am a servant and God, or the divine infinite being is a master, but then we are related the way a father or a mother and a child are related. That brings the relationship a little bit closer. We know that somehow, oftentimes we feel that the closer someone is to us, the more support we can give to each other. And so the second way of connecting with that divine being is through this relationship. In different ways, and many different ways, we can connect and think of the divine. And finally, what they say is that when the relationship becomes so intense to the point that this little I gets out of the way, then there are no longer two. When we begin a relationship, there is an awareness of two people involved in that relationship. But that two remains because each of them has an ego of their own. Now, when this ego gets out of the way, then this feeling of two or feeling of many goes away. And so that sometimes it's what we call dualism, non-dualism, and qualified non-dualism. So coming back to spiritual life as things to be done, and last several months, we have been looking at some of these basic practices of Vedanta. In Sanskrit, they call it sadhana chatushtaya. And I've preferred to just call them as the 4 basic practices of Vedanta. So whichever way we do these things, if we do them diligently, if we do them the way we have been asked to do by our teachers, then a time comes when we begin to see that something, a real big transformation is occurring within us. We often speak about karma yoga, bhakti yoga, jnana yoga, raja yoga. And oftentimes we associate different kinds of doings, different kinds of activities to each of these yogas. But really speaking, the yogas are not about different activities. It's not that if I study scriptures and think, oh, I am the infinite being, then that is jnana yoga. If I sing bhajans and songs, then a devotional song, then that is bhakti yoga. If I go out and do some selfless activity, that is karma yoga. That's a rather simplistic way to understand it. A better way to understand that is these basic practices of Vedanta. And just to remind you, they are simply discernment, viveka, non-attachment, vairagya, and then this set of 6 qualities: restraint of the mind, restraint of the senses, withdrawing the mind and senses back when they stray away, forbearance, concentration, and deep faith. And finally, that intense longing to see God. Now, every Vedanta student, when they start practicing these, because these are pretty abstractly described, it's like practice discernment. But how we act day by day, when we start actually practicing them, we are not all going to do it in the same way. It's just like learning a musical instrument. When you learn an instrument, the reason, even though 10 different people might play the same musical instrument, they all will not necessarily do it exactly in the same way. There is something of the person gets into the activity. And so Jnana Yoga and all these different yogas are really someone who's the thinking part, the part to think if that is more prominent in someone's mental makeup, then when they do these same practices, it will take the form of what we call jnana yoga. In some for whom the power to feel is strong, the emotions and feelings are strong, when they do these same practices, it will take the form of bhakti yoga. Similarly, those who have the power, the willpower, that the effort to strive is strong, and when that gets expressed in the external world, then the same practices take the form of karma yoga. When the striving is directed towards the internal world, then it takes the form of Raja Yoga. So it's not the different practices that we have. It's the same practices, but done with a different mindset with different, whether it's thinking, feeling, striving, important. And it's possible, it's not just that you have to have only one of these three. It's possible that, not possible, all of us have all these three. But sometimes maybe all these three are not equally developed. So one or the other might be a little bit more prominent. That's how then these yogas are differentiated. So it's not really necessary for us to be agonizing a lot about, oh, should I practice this yoga or that yoga? Actually, it's not a choice. We just have to do the spiritual practices that we have been asked to do by our teachers. And then the way automatically, no matter what yoga label is attached to it, we just have to be true to our true nature and keep on doing them. And something wonderful happens, that if we keep on doing these practices diligently, day after day after day, not getting discouraged by failures, then at some point, they stop being things we do, they become transformed into who we are. For instance, take the example of breathing. We would normally say breathing is an activity. But we don't wake up every morning or agonize throughout the day, oh, I've got to breathe, I've got to breathe. We don't set aside a time to breathe. Breathing has become we are not creatures who have to do breathing, we are creatures who breathe. So we are just breathing creatures. So that's become a part of my being, not something that I need to do. And exactly what we want is our spiritual practices at some point, not simply the things to be done, but that's who I am. We see that happening often in art. Again, going back to say, if you are learning to play a musical instrument, in the beginning, there's a lot of attention to details. We have to be very careful about the process, about we are doing things exactly as they are. I remember years ago when I was very little, maybe I think 5 or 6 or 7, I don't know, I started playing these Indian drums, the tabla, at a very young age. And I know the first 1 or 2 days you do, and just the right sound just wouldn't come. And the teacher was saying, keep on doing. And I'm seeing some other people, when they play the same drums, wonderful. And you were just tempted to just go on. And the teacher said, no, just do. And so it took a while for to have the right sound emerge from the tabla. And so similarly, in the spiritual practices we do, it would be wonderful, and it's not impossible, that through God's grace, in the very first day we start practicing, we enter into samadhi. It's happened. If it has not happened so far, it will happen in our lives. But until then, we just have to keep on doing. And over time then, we kind of develop a muscle memory. Same thing with a musical instrument. In the beginning, you have to be so attention to every detail. But once it becomes a part of your nature, once you develop that, you are able to play almost instinctively, effortlessly. You don't then have to think, if you're playing the piano, should I play this key or that key? It's automatically the wonderful music emerges. So I'm not a musician by any standard, but I would imagine, and not just in music, in any sense, any art, that the best music would come or the best painting can emerge not when the artist is feeling I'm doing something, I'm making music. I think the best creativity emerges when that ego gets out of the way, when you're no longer even feeling I'm doing it. And that's when the best results come. Now, what we want is something like that to happen with our spiritual life. Right now, many of us, I imagine, think, oh, I've got to meditate in the morning, I've got to do this, I've got to do that, and which is good. Things to do, doing part of it. What we want at some point, that this must become so ingrained a part of my life, I no longer should have to think, oh, it's now I have got to pray, I've got to meditate. That when that time comes, the mind will automatically start repeating the name of God. Similarly, with these 4 basic practices, yes, discernment, we need to look deeply and every time and practice discernment in our life. But we want at some point that practice should become so much a part of who I am that the mind naturally discerns at every moment in every situation. Non-attachment, which kind of traps us in many ways and is the cause of so much pain and suffering in life. Attachments, can that doing of that, practicing that, take me to a point when I would not be able to get attached even if I tried? It can become so much a part of my mental makeup. Similarly, with the restraint of the mind and the senses, yes, the mind needs to be controlled, the senses need to be controlled. But again, will I ever reach a stage when I don't have to consciously control my mind and senses, that they will get controlled naturally? The Gita gives the example of how a tortoise, at the least sensing a danger, it only withdraws itself under the shell. In the same way, instinctively, my mind and senses, when they begin to recognize this is not good for me or this is not in my interest and withdraw on their own, even when I consciously don't have to do it, that's the kind of stage we want to reach. Same thing with regard to forbearance. We know things are not always going to be perfect. However much we would want everyone around to be wonderful in every way, out in the world, there are great people, but there are also terrible people. And sometimes there's nothing we can do about it. And at such times then, we have a choice. Should I grumble about it? Should I complain? Or should I get frustrated? Should I get angry? Now, if there is something I can do about it, of course I should do about it. But grumbling, getting upset, or criticizing, or complaining, it's a waste of time and energy. And the best thing to do then is to forbear. One of the teachings of Holy Mother Sharda Devi is, it's a very powerful teaching, very simple. She simply says, Mother says, one who forbears survives. One who does not forbear is destroyed. Now, this is not a call to say, let anything happen and just accept it as a doormat. Obviously not. That's why I said, if there's something which you don't like and you can do something about it, you can correct it, you can make it better, of course we should. But in situations when we are completely helpless, we just have to forbear. I mean, when there's a severe winter, what can you do? You can't let the winter go away. Of course, we do the best we can. We cover ourselves, and if we don't have anything to cover ourselves, we just forbear. It's not like we have any choice. But it's not just about the winter. There are many things in life where we wouldn't have a choice. And as Mother says, one who forbears survives. survives to live and fight another day, so to speak. So, similarly with faith, we don't, sometimes when we feel, oh, my faith is shaken, that faith, we want that faith to be so strong that nothing in life can shake it. Similarly with concentration, in the beginning, we all have to struggle. The mind is getting distracted at the time of meditation. But when the mind can be trained in such a way that that becomes its normal way to be, then it'll get concentrated on its own. So that's essentially the ideal in those in Vedanta students, those who want to practice Vedanta, practice spiritual life, that all of the things that we are doing, at some point, we want them to happen so naturally, so effortlessly, that they are no longer what I do, but who I am. There's one story from the Buddha's life that comes to mind. Among these great world teachers, Buddha was one who really lived for a long time. I think he up to probably 80 years. Ramanuja, the another great person, he lived for 120. Most of the teachers have gone pretty early. So Buddha, so this is the story in Buddha's life. We see that even in his old age, he continued to follow all the tiniest little rules of that monastery. And so some of his immediate disciples went to Buddha and saw that he's carrying out every little detail of the practices that were expected of those living in the monastery. So his disciples go and say, "Oh, Venerable One, you don't need to do all these rules were made for these novices so that some discipline might go into them. You're already enlightened. You don't need to follow these rules." When the Buddha heard that, the Buddha smiled and Buddha said, "When I was young, I did all these things. I practiced all these things. I observed all these rules. Now I don't follow these rules. Now these rules follow me." That's what we want things to happen in our life. That, yes, we have to meditate, we have to study, but what we want is the mind should be a meditating mind. That I am who I want to be after doing. So when all of these things become spontaneous, effortless in my life, that is the time we have graduated, so to speak. If you remember, I had mentioned some time back that in Vedanta they sometimes say that there are different levels of students. And the highest category of student is one who just have to hear the truth once and then they'll be liberated. So once all of these practices become natural and spontaneous in our lives, when we are no longer doing them, but they are who we have become, it's that then we have reached that highest category of students. And what do we have to do after that? Nothing much. That at that time, you just open any Vedanta book and you hear say, you are a part of the divine, or you are divine, and at once the heart will open up. And then that would be the state of enlightenment. So all doing is ultimately to make us be who we truly are. As long as we are not who we are, some amount of sense of unfulfillment, some stress and anxiety and worry will be a part of our life. And one final thought, can we ever be other than who we are? And the answer is no. Who we are is who we are. And so that's why the Vedantic teaching that every one of us is divine, not simply we are going to be divine at some point in future, we are divine right now. I know it's going to sound very odd, in a way we can say every one of us is already enlightened. right now. But if we don't know it, we are not. It makes no difference. There was there was uh, this one movie had come some few years ago called, I think it was called Black Mass, and it was about actually a Boston resident, the Whitey Bulger's life story. And in that movie, there was this one incident, which is really nothing to do with spiritual life, really. I don't know why I even thought about it, but there is some connection there. So, as we see, there is this incident. So here is this big mafia boss, and his little child comes home from school, and the mother is upset that this little boy has got into a fight in school, and he has beaten another one student, a fellow student, a classmate, and blood emerged, and then the teachers called this mother and said, your child is violent, and so on. And so she then, when the father comes home, she tells the father, tell him something. This is what he did in school. And the father is a mafia boss, so you can imagine. So he looks at the little boy and says, what happened? And the boy says, oh, there was this one boy who was bullying me for many days, and I couldn't take it anymore. So I just gave him, and then, of course, I think blood came from his ears or something. Then the father says, did anybody see you do it? And the child says, no. Then the father said, then it didn't happen. No, this is not what I recommend you should tell any of your children. But I may be the infinite being. I may be already enlightened. If I don't know it, it makes no difference. That it's, for instance, this again happened some years ago. I was going for a walk in the morning, and I passed by Starbucks, and I thought, oh, it'll be nice to have a latte or something. And then I discovered I'd forgotten to bring my wallet with me. And so then I said, okay, so I don't have any. And there wasn't that the touchless payment. It was before those days. And so I just walked on. And when I returned back, when I came back to the center, then I discovered the jacket that I was wearing, at some time passed, and I'd completely forgotten about it. In the inner pocket of the jacket, there was a $20 bill. And if I knew it, I could have had my latte. But I didn't know it. So I had it, but if I didn't know it, it was completely useless. Now that's our problem. We are already enlightened. We are that infinite being. We don't know it, so we just think, I'm this little human being, I need to do this, I need to do that. And what we have learned, not only from texts, but from the teachings of all these great ones, that yes, there are certain things we can do, and if we do them well, then what we do not know now, we will know later. And once that knowledge comes, it's knowledge of who I already was. A great disciple of Ramakrishna, Mahapurush Maharaj, Swami Shivananda, he said once, he said, why do people make big deal about enlightenment? Enlightenment is, you just know who you are. So it just seems like a very ordinary thing, but it completely brings about an end of everything that bothers us, everything that all the pain and suffering will go away forever if we only know who we are. And for that to happen, this doing part must be transformed into being. If we do good things, we no longer would have to do good things if I am good. If I am a good person, then what I think, what I do will automatically be good. That's the idea behind it. So a lot to think about. Let's keep on doing the right thing so that we eventually become what we want to be. Om Jananim Saradam Devim Ramakrishnam Jagadgurum Padapadme Tayo Shritva Pranamami Muhurmuhu.